Hi, you're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore. Boggy Talk is recorded on Boggy Bayou in Niceville, Florida, and is hosted by Justin Wyatt and James Ross, pastors at Church on Bayshore. We typically want every matter of faith and life to have crystal clear answers, but it isn't always that easy. This podcast digs in to help Christians think with a kingdom mentality about topics that sometimes get muddy and bog us down. So let's dive in.
Hey, welcome to Boggy Talk, picking up with part 2 of our episode of talking through issues from the Southern Baptist Convention, which met earlier in June. And let's just dive right in. But before we dive into some of the things we're talking about, let's talk about resolutions. Because at the Southern Baptist Convention, one of the things that happens is people bring resolutions, and it gets voted on, and people want to push all kinds of things. And while the vast majority of them are great or good or have a purpose, sometimes they can be a little
sorry, what was that, Justin? I was just too busy reading
all the resolutions. So there's a book that
Just
James is, if you're listening, James is holding a book, and it's like a solid like 200 pages book of reports.
Yeah.
And then there's some resolutions, but also people just get them like, because part of the format is like essentially open mic. And it's kind of like, who gets to the mic first and gets to talk? How does this work? And what are some of the funny resolutions? Not funny, but interesting resolutions.
So you actually get to submit your resolutions in advance.
Ooh, that's
so there's
smart.
like a portal on the SBC website.
Portal, wow.
And you submit your resolutions in advance, and the resolutions committee decides which one of those are legit and suggests them, to the body. Now, if yours didn't get brought up, you have the opportunity to come to the mic and say, hey, how come my resolution, that we wear long pants, during the summer, didn't get brought up? I'm sure that has been one before. I walk out during this session because they are not binding. They have no actual effect on the business of the convention or the entities. They're just tweets. They're glorified tweets, and I think it's silly. And I hope we eventually get rid of the resolutions committee.
So what were some of the resolutions that were brought to the
I don't even know.
Yeah, that's right, because you were going.
Yeah, I walked out.
I heard one. It was basically a condemnation of Disney. I heard that one.
No, that's somebody. So you can bring forth a resolution at the committee as well.
And he was reading it.
Right. But I think those have to be brought back the next year typically.
Gotcha.
Unless they get a percentage of people who say, yes, let's make this resolution. And typically they're not. But yeah, one guy made a recommendation that we boycott Disney again.
I was like, wow, I think I remember this from being a teenager.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Meanwhile, the SBC had actually emailed hey, if you're coming to the convention,
here's a discounted ticket to Disney.
Yeah. It's like this is kind of ironic.
So and that's a nuanced issue, because it's the majority of people there's 9,000 people there, totally disagree with the direction of Disney World, right? But is a boycott, I think we've talked about this, effective? Because you got to boycott probably Kit Kat, right? Because whoever makes them has pride colors during the month of June. And so it's kind of what good is us actually making a resolution that we stand against Disney going to do? Disney does not care anymore. So yeah, it's funny the things that get recommended, at the convention, somebody, hey, make a motion that, we seriously, we say so, whatever their pet peeve is, right? Whoever's made them mad, that we essentially we disassociate with Bethel, or we that was you who made that one. No, I'm just kidding. But
that was
yeah, it's just but it's the beauty of anybody could go up to the mic.
Right. Yes, exactly. It is the system is designed to give everyone the opportunity, which is good. Equal opportunity.
In our church,
exactly. It's the same in our church business meeting. Anybody can ask any question.
Yeah.
Because we value every person and voice, but it also that comes with, I wouldn't say a downside, but it is the downside of anybody can say anything.
Yeah.
And, typically you kind of know who those people are.
Yeah. They're definitely the reoccurring people. I'm some of these kids are that guy in, Bible college class who had to ask a question about everything. I'm you're 70 years old now and you're doing the same thing.
Or they want to debate the professor about some nuance, and then you just are I'm tuning out right now.
Yeah. So it's just, they want to be, I think some of them are excited to be on the big screen in front of 9,000 people. Seriously, what are you doing, man? Like, go to Twitter. And at one time, the parliamentarian even said, "This is not Twitter."
Yeah.
Like, ask your question,
Yes.
like it was.
I remember at one point I watched, like the moderator said, like the guy just kept talking, and the guy, he was like, "With all due respect, can you get to your question?" Because the guy because
you're wasting people's time because there's a limited amount of time, and so there's a line for the microphone,
Yes. So it's crazy. So let's talk about some more of the issues and things that happened at the Southern Baptist Convention, and we alluded to this last week. One of those was really the liberal drift issue. There's this group called the Conservative Baptist Network who would say that they are trying to safeguard the SBC from drifting liberal and basically steer it back in the right direction. And then from the other side, there are those who then would say, and the CBN is a bunch of pirates. That actually is what they've been called online. There's going back to Twitter and all these conversations that are happening. So let's explain this issue and what's going on.
Yeah, it's hard for me not to explain this without already formed opinions just because of exposure to it. But, in our country, there is definitely a progressive direction that we've been heading politically and culturally. LGBTQ plus issues, and then, just more things than that. So what this group is suggesting is that has infiltrated a lot of our, specifically pastors in cities at bigger churches, where they are drifting in that direction. And so, a couple years ago at the convention, I believe in Dallas, or maybe it was Birmingham, we made a resolution to affirm value in critical race theory and other theories, which, again, why are we making resolutions? So that understandably caused some people to say, whoa, what are we talking about here? Because, CRT at its core really has some bad assumptions about humanity, and that doesn't mean that there isn't a case to be made for systemic racism and at least the effects of systemic racism lingering in our country today. But a couple of years ago to say, hey, we see value in it, and there's value in everything. So it's a pointless recommendation, but that caused concern. And I think that was probably the trigger that got things going in the right direction. And there are a few guys who are very involved in politics in America who see this as a means to affect politics in America, because the Southern Baptist Convention is 47,000 churches. It's the largest Protestant group of believers there is.
And so if you can mobilize them to vote, it can really impact an election.
Yeah, right. So there are some things that you could say, I see the point in this. So probably the biggest issue that brought this to the light was there had been a call to disfellowship Saddleback Church. That's Rick Warren, Purpose Driven Life. That's his church in Southern California, not that far from Aneheim, California, which is just weird that this is happening in Aneheim, right? And it was over their ordination of 3 women as pastors. So that was brought to the Credentials Committee. The Credentials Committee is the group that basically says, should they handle claims that a church should be disfellowshipped for their beliefs or their practice. And they were saying, hey, we need to appoint a task force to investigate how Southern Baptists view not women teaching, but women in roles where they have the gifting of pastor, but aren't actually over in the office of pastor. We just need some clarity on this. And that created quite a storm, because they're like, we don't need clarity on this. We, in 2000, when we, not redefined the Baptist faith and message, but reworded the Baptist faith and message and brought some clarity, we were unified. Women are not, and to be in the position of pastor. So people are like, we just need to disfellowship them right now. And then Adam Greenway actually that's president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, actually made the suggestion, why don't we look into further some of these secondary issues, if you will, to the gospel. how we're to handle those moving forward.
Right.
And the CBN group is just basically like, no, like, I can't believe we're talking about this. Like, get rid of them. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think part of the confusion specifically around this issue is the fact that, going back to a word we used last week, the autonomy of Southern Baptist churches. And so what you will find is that Southern Baptist churches are not all governed the same way at the church level. They use different words and labels for different roles. So, for example, you could have a church where, I'm the pastor of worship and missions, where you could have someone in that role of leading the music, the worship, it's a director position. And they would be called the director of worship or the pastor of worship. And in some Baptist churches, that could be a man or a woman, depending on how they are functioning. And looking at the same as kids and looking at the same as student ministry. And so adding to the confusion of it, I think, is the fact that you have different terms being used for different roles. And so it really is. And so ultimately there's what the study or the motion was basically to study how we handle this, because ultimately for the clarity that's needed is going to be some kind of, to give clarity to this is going to be someone outside of the local church saying this is how we should, which comes back to the autonomy of the church.
Which the motion was defeated. The recommendation was defeated, and then the motion was withdrawn. So it didn't even get addressed. And then Rick Warren showed up actually. I'll just basically bragged about how awesome he is and his church is, being, real. That's what he did. It was. I
didn't see this.
Oh man, it was like, what are you doing, dude? And I met him right after that, by the way. Seems like a nice guy, but and then he said we need to not be divided about secondary issues. But that's the challenge, is okay. But when you're at Southern Baptist Convention, you're sending missionaries together, you're planting churches together. You're sending people to seminary together. So, we have different seminaries in the Methodist, right? Like, so again, not saying they're not saved, but saying, hey, we intentionally draw some lines. That's where this gets tough for Southern Baptists, because like Rick Warren can do what he wants to do at his church. His people can do it. Well, he literally can probably do what he wants to do, but his people can do what they want to do. But then when we're sending people to the same seminaries and sending people to the mission field, like that begins to creep. And so there's a legitimate, question, for me, I'm kind of more like, look, as long as this is IMB's policy and NAM's policy and the seminary's policies, I'm good. And they're kind of, participating in a group that's more conservative, if you want to use that, than they are. But the argument is, well, if we continue to allow that, it's just going to grow and grow and grow, and it's going to take over the SBC because those churches can vote.
Right.
And there's a legitimate point in that. I mean, so I don't know the answer. I think there needs to be more examination. Personally, I think division is inevitable. That's my personal opinion.
I agree, because there's only so long you can sustain the tension, before someone's just like, we're out. Or, the problem is no one's right now wants to say they're out. They want to take it over. Both sides want to be in control. And so I'm kind of with you in that. And I think that eventually probably would happen. And I think, the flip side of that is that we get some people who on secondary issues would say, this is the right way to interpret this. And and we talked about this before, like the danger of saying this is my conviction on this secondary issue, and if you're wrong, now it's all of a sudden like you don't believe in the same inerrancy of Scripture that I do, and it's like no, that's not the appeal. The appeal is like we interpreted this very differently, and is the difference in interpretation over this worth separating? And I think that's the question that's going to have to be answered down the road,
right? For Southern Baptists,
Southern Baptists,
that has been drawn between Methodists, Presbyterians, Baptists, all those things,
right?
But now that just is all right. In a good way, like there is less of a distinction sometimes between these denominations. It's just like Jesus people. But then in a bad way, it's like, okay, but what do these Jesus people actually believe? And at what point are we actually believing in the real Jesus? And I think that just gets muddy. And like you said, I'm okay with cooperating with certain churches on certain things, but I'm not going to send my kids to be taught by them, And so I think, and there are people who hold a more conservative, for lack of a better word, view of that, more tight-gripped view of that than I do in the SBC. And it's just tough. And here's the thing. the SBC has always been this nuanced.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the reason
It's just not always been this public.
right, because of Twitter and
Right.
social media, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like, and the internet, like,
Mhm.
so it's in your face that someone who says they believe what you believe actually has differing beliefs.
Right.
It's in your face every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a defensiveness
Right.
and antagonism. You know, I mean, back to the Bethel conversation we had a few weeks ago. It's like churches, I mean, we've kind of decided we're not going to do Bethel songs. And it's just because it's so easy to get into Bethel by liking their music today. Well, that really wasn't a problem for the church 30 years ago. Right. Like, I like that song. I might listen to their CD, but you're not going to all of a sudden find yourself listening to Bill Johnson teach that, you know, the angels are going to come and take over your body and win some weird victory. Sorry, you know, but like, I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
you know, like, so it's just it's uncharted waters.
Right.
And at the same time, there's this huge cultural shift in our country taking place,
Mm-hmm.
and it all gets lumped in together.
It does, and I think people just start vilifying each other, and that's where, like, I'm very comfortable working with people who maybe, you know, these secondary issues we don't agree. What really drives me crazy is when people start us like name calling and just writing people off, and that
Right.
has happened,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, it
it's
has.
grievous.
Yeah.
But and it's both sides. Just
Yeah.
like you know, it would be you know, I could look at people of, you know, the Conservative Baptist Network and be like, they're vilifying people. I can easily do the same thing. And I think what's happening is that we're writing people off. And
Right.
like, we do have like essentially on most things agree.
Yeah.
And so it really, the question, and come back to what we said, like, it's going to come down to how long can we tolerate the tension?
Right.
And for some people cannot tolerate tension. They
You're
just
right.
have to have uber clarity on everything. And it may get to the point where the Southern Baptist Convention isn't the place for them if they need everyone to agree on every point of everything they
You're
believe
right.
about the Bible. Okay, well, we're going to have
I don't
to
even have
deal-
that in my church.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, we all, you know, it's just going to come to a point where we're going to have to decide that.
And yeah, strong leaders struggle with that, you know, I mean, I really struggle. It makes me sad on a spiritual level, but then on a personal level, like how much I've talked about the unhealthiness of the travel sports culture, and that there are people who love our church and love me who are like, I don't care. Like, you know, that's hard for me, but I've just come to realize, like, I can't make them see what I see, and it's not my job to make them. I'm like, just preach the truth. And so some of these people in the SBC, like, they think they're right, and they're trying to make people see what they see, and they can't. Like, they just have to communicate the truth and love people. And I think, like, that's the weird thing about the SBC is there's not enough sitting down and talking to these issues. So there's one guy, and he's a huge part of what's happening. I've offered to sit down and have lunch, like, you know, and let's talk about this, because I see where you're coming from and disagree with your rhetoric, and he hasn't done that. And so to me, it's like, if people aren't willing to sit down with people, and so I'm not liberal, and I would be accused just because I'm not, you know, against some of these things, or I'm for, you know, going about it in a more peaceable way, I would be accused of being liberal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
that's
like,
where I'm like, stop.
I know, you know, so it's just interesting. I mean, so David Platt, who's not SBC anymore, but when Trump, you know, said, hey, I'm going to come to your church, you know, I don't know if you remember this, but he's in DC. And so
he literally
Trump
called, like,
was coming
I'm on the way. I want you to, yeah.
And so he just prayed for him, and he really prayed the gospel. Well, you know, there were people in his church who are liberal because they're in DC, and I hate these words, by the way, liberal and conservative, but who were upset that he prayed for Trump.
Right.
And then he came out and clarified why he did it. And then there were conservatives that are mad at him that he was clarifying why he did it. And I'm like,
you can't make everybody happy. Like, people just
so
gotta think.
He's viewed as woke, you know. I mean, and Bart Barber, who was, and we'll get to the presidential election, you know, because he isn't just like, this has got to stop and we need to go up all this way. He's being, people are saying he's liberal when he's like this country small
Affable,
church. I don't know him personally, but I know a lot of people who know him well. Just when you think of like a Southern Baptist pastor, not the judgmental time, but just like good
just
all
like
shucks, you know, like it's him.
Yeah.
He's
like
cows,
that.
You know,
he's like that to me, like, and he's like the anti-slick, you know, like people just want to be like the slick, cool, and like he just at least embodies himself online, like the anti-slick, like I just am who I am, you know?
Yeah. I think he's the right kind of guy. I mean, it's not a big mega, again, his church is like 300 something people, like not a mega church pastor. I think because of what's been going on, we need to get away from that for a little while. I think he's a people, you know, and again, there's not a ton of power really in the presidential, you know,
right.
But the CBN has had a candidate the last 2 years that they wanted to be the new president to change the direction.
Right.
And he's lost pretty probably 60% to 40%.
So let's talk about that, because that's, that really kind of dovetails into where we've talked about the CV and liberal drift into the presidential election. And going in, there were three candidates, and then four. There were four.
So you can't. A runoff, you're not actually a candidate until the convention.
Gotcha.
So you can publicly announce via social media that you are going to be. You let your name be put forth, but you are not actually a candidate until you get nominated 10 minutes before the election.
Right.
And so, you had this guy who was there was no chance he was going to win. Then you had Bart Barber, who ended up putting his name forth after Willie Rice, withdrew his name because of, they had a deacon that had a history of sex abuse and, basically long story, but he put his name. And I know Willie and think he would have been good, but, that situation, I understand why he withdrew his name. And then Bart's like, hey, I will do it. And then Tom Askell, who's in Florida, was the Conservative Baptist Network guy who's like, hey, we're going to, basically go in this direction. And then at the last minute, a guy who's kind of been around for a long time let his name be put forth. And I thought, and I know the guy who nominated him. I heard him talking about nominating him. I know those people. And I was thinking, this guy's probably not going to win in light of like what's happened with the old guard recently. Right. Well, he's just not going to win because this guy's attached to the old guard, and not that all the old guard is bad, but the old guard is basically the ones under investigation, who all this stuff has happened with right now.
Exactly.
So he's not going to win. And so there was a runoff between Askell and Barber. And Barber won, and I that's who I voted for. I think that he's the right guy. So
he seems very unifying in terms, but very convictional.
I do think he's conservative. He's just not antagonistic about his conservatism.
Exactly, and that's really what we need. Yeah, in terms of like let's even disagree on things, but disagree peacefully and peaceably, and keep the mission in front of us.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the Saddleback and women pastor issues, and then some of that crept into conversations and questions of seminaries as well.
Yeah. But, and part of it, the Southeastern has Karen Swallows Pryor, who, I mean, she says things that seem liberal on social media. I don't think she is, but there's definitely this. There's definitely this group who are way more sympathetic to progressive culture than the traditional Southern Baptist. And some of that is good in engagement. And some of that is like, where are they going with this? And unfortunately, we've seen so many people just completely go in that direction
there's a hesitancy.
Yeah. When you see those same things, you're like, what are they talking about? So that's where I'm at.
You don't know where everybody's going, and you can't tell the future. You don't know. And so there is a hesitancy, but there's also we do need to be prodded and to think about things differently. So it's all it is. It goes back to the word tension. There's so much tension in all this.
Yeah. And so many people just attach themselves to people. So hey, I'm going to be loyal to Russell Moore. I'm going to be loyal to, the presidents of the seminary. If I like them a lot, I'm going to be loyal to Karen Swallow Pryor. I'm going to be loyal to J.D. Greer. And so there's so much of that going on, that it just, hey, you're attacking so-and-so. Okay, now I'm going to attack you. And, but yeah, I the seminaries, have people who have said things. Some of them have people who have said things that seem sympathetic to a culturally progressive direction. And that has caused people to be concerned. And I think it's good that we're keeping our eyes on that. I do, but also to be hateful and mean, that's where it kind of crosses the line. Why can't we have dialogue about this? And so, I don't personally think the seminaries are in any danger of heading in some major direction that way. One of the issues that was brought up is that, women can get theological training at these seminaries, and then they will use that. And some of them have become pastors. And so why are we doing that? And it's well, they, Southern,
heaven forbid, they get theological training.
Right. If Southeastern has a stance that we believe the office of pastor is reserved for men in accordance with the scripture, but we're going to train women to be sound theological teachers. I have no problem with that. What those women decide to do, that's between them and the Lord. We need more women who are preaching the word. There is so much garbage in women's ministry right now. And that's one thing we're trying to do is, hey, let's build up women who know the word and proclaim the word boldly. So yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Man. Yeah. Conversation going for a while on that. So anything else?
Yeah, let's make fun of all the women's ministry stuff that's taught, but then let's not train women.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's just like, come on, like why is that an issue? That's kind of my takeaway.
Yeah. It's because you're taking the 5% and you're really
exactly.
less than
It comes back to like and I think a lot of this just gets on both sides.
Boggy?
Boggy, but also scandalized. Like it's not
that's
an
true.
issue, but let's make this an issue because it takes attention away from whatever we really want.
Are you going to retitle this episode Scandy Talk?
Scandy Talk. That sounds terrible. Scandy
Yeah, it does.
Talk.
Scandy.
Anything else from the Southern Baptist Convention you want to mention?
No, there was a, ERLC, the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission. There was a motion to defund them. Yeah. So basically to get rid of it. Sorry. And it was brought down. But the concern was, hey, we've had people who don't represent all of Southern Baptists and it creates division. And there's truth in that. That's the thing. Most of these issues, there is some truth on both sides. Mm-hmm. And I think this is true in your home. This is true in your church. This is true at your job. Like, it's usually not James is right, Justin's wrong. Mm-hmm. It's usually Justin's right, James is wrong. No, I'm just kidding. It's usually like there's some nuances of truth. And here's what I think. Even if you come to me with something and I'm 90% right, like I'm trying to hear from you. What is true about what Justin, even my harshest critics who I don't think are in the right spirit, like God has taught me so much through them. And so it doesn't mean I change my direction flippantly because someone brings up a critique, but it means like, Lord, what are you trying to show me and teach me through this? And ultimately, here's what I know very clearly. My character should be Christ-like.
Right. Absolutely. As you were saying that, I was thinking, is there one person who really represents all Southern Baptists? No. And I would people say, well,
Jesus doesn't even, sadly.
Jesus, I know.
Sadly, he doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's so much division in certain ways and just un-Christ-likeness in many ways. But Jesus should be the one who represents us fully. And I think that's the rub in this is that being Southern Baptist and being the way we are structured, the way it's governed and autonomy, it's going to be a bunch of different flavors, and it's going to be we're going to have to be comfortable in seeing things differently, learning from each other, and cooperating together moving forward.
So I'll say that sometimes what I find at these things is I'm like, man, I don't really have a home. Like I don't have. Like I'm looking for that group who we all share not perfectly, but same direction. And I realized that's because the local church is my home. That's where I belong, and these things are really secondary or third, thirdary to that.
Agreed. Yeah. It all falls underneath what,
I think if you're a Jesus person, you start to love the local church more and more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if you're involved in parachurch stuff.
That's all. It can be good. It's a wonderful ministries, but exactly, it is the local church where it's at. That's where you find your people who, push you towards Jesus, who love you, who support you, who care for you, who challenge you. And ultimately, you work together for the advancement of the gospel.
Yeah.
So, man, as we're saying that, I'm like, man, what a big weight.
Let's go for it. Yeah, let's go. So we're going to take a break, right?
We're going to take a break for the month of July because it's July and we have crazy July.
You're all over the place. We're all over the place.
We're all over the place. So coming back in August, we will come back with a new season of Boggy Talk. We'll probably change some things up. It should be pretty exciting.
New format. We're gonna explain that at any point.
We'll probably explain it once we figure it out fully.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, we're gonna change the format a little bit. And I think it'll be great. So
anyway, if you have any suggestions on what can make Boggy Talk
ideas,
better,
suggestions, things you want us to talk about,
especially if it's on a Post-it with iced coffee.
That's right. We love some iced coffee. Yeah. So hey, we again, if you got any questions about Southern Baptist stuff, feel free to reach out, send us a message. We'll be happy to get back with you, clarify some things, and really we want to have this just a posture of humility in all of this. But like we said, we'll kick off a new season in August. If you've got ideas, suggestions, let us know. Beyond that, we love you, Boggy Talk Nation. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.